Thoughtful gifts are always the best, aren't they? Aren't they? But how do you find the right one for weather enthusiasts? Welcome to What Is It About the Weather podcast, where we explore the many ways that weather intertwines itself into our lives. I'm your host, Mark Chalonic. And this week, I thought I'd talk weather gifts. I don't know, gifts in general. Before we get there, as always, I hope your weather's treating you well. Mine? Yay, it's weather. Had a few thunderstorms the other day. I was thankful for those. They were kind of distant, right? I always like to have the vista view of thunderstorms, and my setup here isn't ideal for that. So I always appreciate it when I get some that I can kind of watch as they make their way across the horizon. Whatever your weather's been, I hope it's been enjoyable. Hope it's been to your liking. In all aspects, you know, it's not just one thing, right? It can be really cool looking weather, but if it's really uncomfortable temperature wise, you may not enjoy it at all, right? Unless you're inside, you know, again, enjoying the views, of course. But in any case, I hope yours going well. You know, like I said, mine's kind of been I'll take it. You know, I'm not going to complain or anything. But I'm ready for summer to be over. You're probably tired of hearing me say that. I think we'd all be better off if it just cool off a little, right? You wouldn't have to listen to me talk about it. Any case, weather watches. I want to thank Aaron. Gave a very thoughtful response on Patreon talking about weather warnings, and I've heard from a few folks with regards to the weather warning stuff. But I do think that. Yeah, it's going to be one of those topics, I guess, that I'll continue to think about, because as I go through my different experiences and as I have to think about, as I talked about in the last episode, how I convey messages, I like to hope at least that I evolve and try to make it better. And I do think there are opportunities, and I do think we live in an age where it can be more personalized. Now, Aaron conveyed one of the challenges he has with apps is, you would hope apps at times would be more customizable or able to be more attuned or filtered to the individual user. Now, I know there are a lot that aren't, and Aaron brought up an app, Weather Underground, which is one I still use. But the reality is, Weather Underground, when it was its own thing, was great. And, they were one of the first that took personal weather station data and put it out there for all of us to see. But as they got swallowed up and ultimately swallowed up by IBM, they're more of I think it's maintained because it was a thing. And as much as I like it, I'm watching other apps that have kind of visually and even in what's available to do with it are probably overtaking it. I still use the app, but I think unfortunately for myself and Aaron and anybody that's still using the app, over time we're probably going to have to make an alternate choice. But yeah, his comment was understandable about wishing that they would have some flexibility in their interface on a per user basis that they don't really have. And again, it sounds, sometimes some of the things might seem easy to us as the users. And I know as a coder that there are sometimes that what seems to be the easiest thing to implement can quite often be the hardest. And it's tricky. And with all these things, it's still a money game. These people have to make money for the work that they do quite often. And they may have to choose between doing something that satisfies a larger group versus something that satisfies what they perceive as an individual. And this is where I think developers get it wrong sometimes. Is we think maybe because just one person's asking for it, that they're going to be the only one that uses it. And I think the reality is quite often that some of the best ideas that I've ever implemented have come from a single user who was passionate about the topic and was able to convey it well enough that I understood the gist of it. And once something was implemented, you realize that a lot of people are going, oh, that's really cool, right? I really never thought about it. That's quite often the limitation is there's this one person who really they had put some thought and some mind into it. And, a lot of people benefited because of it. So yeah, hopefully they'll get there. We'll see. The other thing And I get asked this, and so I'm going to make it clear. One of the things that people often kind of wonder with seasons, right, as we see these things with, whether it's a meteorological summer, which we're definitely out of coming up here in a few days, right? So we've got September on our doorstep. So in a couple days, you're going to hear me saying it's not summer anymore. And in the way I work, it's not. And then you've got other people that say, summer is still into this later in the month when we have, the sun doing its equator thing, because that's what time of year it is. But people often ask me why we have these variances and why things follow. And there is something that you just need to keep in mind, that it, whether no matter what season people are talking about, that when, I do analysis, or whether, we do it based on the moon, all these things are it's like a lot of things. It's sort of irrelevant. Some can be when you define it, or it can be very geographic for where you live. And we do see this seasonal lag component, and it is something to keep in mind, that the sun phases tend to start the shift before you see things transpire. And that's why quite often, I grew up in an area where fall tended to lag later, right? It seemed to come almost, but at the time we were talking about winter, etc. But it is often why you see, let's say in winter, when you hear people talk about December, and you get all the stuff between here in the U.S. between Thanksgiving and Christmas, a lot of people talking about it, but the colder months don't come till later. And yes, I know the actual winter solstice date is late in December, but we get this lag, and it does have something to do with the way the sun heats the earth and the way the temperatures are stored in the oceans, etc. All those things come into play. So the reason we see some of that is this seasonal lag. And so I know I as much as I want summer to come to an end, it's not going to be immediate. But if you ever look at a seasonal map for most places that kind of go through a normal cyclical process, you will see that there's often this phase shift. So just something to keep in mind. So I know I want it, but then maybe I can get a little early cooling in late summer and have a nice long fall, but we shall see. Any case, all right, let's get on to the main topic. I'm not going to keep, I'm rambling about seasonal lags and watches and stuff. And well, watches, I guess I could talk about watches, birthday watch, but we're going to talk about gifting, right? Because yes, I'm older again. By the way we measure older, I kind of the way I look at it, every day I get older, right? We all do. As far as I know, we're all living in a time sequence. If you're living outside the fourth dimension, good for you. I'm happy that you're able to do that. I think that would be a neat trick for a lot of people. But I live in this linear kind of frame set, and I'm getting older. But we have these moments where we go, yay, you survived another cycle of the sun, sort of thing, right? And the earth went around the sun one more time. Maybe you celebrate. Maybe I should do it that way. We should have moon birthday orientation. We get really old. In any case, birthday time. Thanks for all who wish me birthday. Happy birthday. And I, got this new watch, and the new watch has new weather instrumentation that I think is, it's good, right? Do I think it's going to be whiz bang better? No, but do I think it's going to be better? I guess all in all, the watch is great. Been very happy with it so far. It's my first one that actually has a touch face to it, which I wasn't sure I would use, but I have been using. I like buttons on my watch because there are certain things I do where I don't want the face to be active, and this is one of those watches that does that for me, so that when I'm in physically active activities, the face by default turns off so I don't accidentally hit it and do something I don't want to do. So I'm grateful for that. But it got me to thinking about weather gifts in general, because I get that question a lot. And I remember the first, what I would call weather gift that I got. Now, I got a weather radio as a kid, and I mentioned that before. And it was a birthday present. And looking back on it, that was my first weather gift. But I never really thought about it in that regard. I mean, it was just kind of this cool, neat piece of technology. I was kind of a radio kid anyways. I remember Back when I was growing up, AM radio was still, it's finally fading, right? It got its second generation with the kind of the political spectrum, but it's finally fading again. But I used to love listening to AM radio at night when you could get signals from way far away. And I still remember, right, getting hockey games. So I think if I'm remembering correctly, that actually the signals do carry a little bit better in the wintertime. But I would get these hockey games from, like, I don't know if it's Quebec or Montreal, wherever it was. I didn't understand. They were in French. It wasn't the only hockey games I got. But I always thought that was really cool. And yeah, it would last, and then it would fade, and it'd come back in. But just the idea of the signal from far away was always kind of cool to me. And I guess I thought about weather radio in the same regard as, radio is kind of one of those mystical things, and to some respect TV is as well. But, once you get cable TV and it kind of comes through a wire in the wall, it kind of takes some of the mystery out of it. But the first weather gift that I got that kind of was like somebody said, I know you really are into weather, and gave me that gift was I got a best man gift, right, from my friend Craig, who gave me this device that I still have today, right? It's one of those things. If I'm a hoarder for weather things, right? That's the one thing you will find that I hoard stuff on. I'm very anti-hoard in general, so hopefully people won't give me too many weather things, or at some time I'll run out of space. But I still remember getting that gift and how grateful I was for that gift. And I think what was maybe more important was it hit him that way, that he saw me as being into the weather. And it's kind of, that's been part of my story is, yes, I've always been in the weather, and maybe I just didn't recognize how much I was talking about it or thought it was cool or that sort of thing. Because I remember also early on getting a Galilean thermometer. And for those of you that don't know what those are the ones that are kind of, it's like a glass rod, and it has little bubbles that float in it. And when those came out, how many ever years ago now, and that wasn't a new thing obviously then, but it was kind of a trendy gift, and they were rather expensive. And I remember getting one of those as a holiday gift. It was actually a Christmas gift. And just thought it was really cool, right? We were not in a situation where I was going to get the big one that cost bazillions. It wasn't bazillions of dollars. I know I'm exaggerating. But I got one that sat well on a desk, and it was it was a nice gift. And of course, over time, I've continued to get more gifts. I remember getting the first, what I would call high quality weather station, a Davis Vantage 2 weather station, and setting that thing up in Chicago, of all places. I had access to the roof of the building I was living in and was able to set it up top there. So I have all these fond memories of getting weather gifts. And many people who are listening to this podcast probably like getting weather gifts, but you may also have people that you want to get weather gifts for. And so I get this kind of question again, which is, how do I find the right gift? Well, I'm not going to give magic answers. I'm going to give you some thoughts of how I recommend for people that go through the process, because weather gifts can be really cheap, really inexpensive. And I don't mean, there's some sub $10 stuff that you get that would be okay, but I'm still saying $10 to $20. And even with inflation. And then there's going to be stuff that you could spend probably in excess of $1,000 on. And, you'll understand when we get to talking about it. So they really do run the gamut. But it's kind of like most things. I remember I saw some article about a TikToker this week that was very upset that they didn't want people giving their baby junk anymore. And I was like, what is this all about? And somebody was complaining that people were giving gifts and they weren't thoughtful. It's like, if you're not going to give a thoughtful gift, or if you're going to re-gift something, then I don't want it, right? And quite frankly, I remember getting a re-gift as a wedding present, right? And still laughing about how actually it was okay. It was funny because the card was still in the gift. So I caught them red-handed. It definitely was a re-gift situation. But used it for a while, threw it away, took it for what it was. It was kind of an inexpensive thing, but it was something I could use. So I understand that. And you don't want to be the person that gets accused of being the re-gifter or not putting thought in it. And, for all of us, there are times when we have a lot of time to think about a present or to get a present. And I will say, as I've gotten older, or in the last, let's say 5 years, I've gotten more into just doing gift cards for some people. And I don't like that approach, and never have, because it is kind of the easy way out. But let's be clear. I would rather give somebody a gift card and let them choose what they want and make use of some money, right, than buy them something that they're going to hate. I am a believer in that process. So what I want to try to help you do is, if you're going to buy a weather-related gift for somebody, hopefully it's thoughtful to begin with and they appreciate it for what it is, but you can think about some aspects of it that will probably make it easier to determine if you're going to walk down that path. Right. So number one is always clearly define your budget. And that's not unique to this kind of gift, but it's important to keep that in mind, because it's very easy with anything we buy, right? Any category even, to get from being within a budget to outside a budget very quickly. And so if you don't know what your budget is, you're going to be just taking a stab in the dark. And that could be on the low end too, right? If your budget, let's say, is $100 and you buy something that's $25, the person that's getting it's going to know it's a $25 gift. That's the other thing. In this day and age, everybody can kind of find out the price of everything they're getting. So the thoughtful gift makes more sense, right? The other thing I tell people is know how weathery your recipient is. And I mean this in terms of, maybe it's not how weathery, but the type of weathery, right? So is this somebody who appreciates weather? Is it somebody that really wants to learn about weather? And so that might be, something that is applied depending on the age range they're in. But quite often it's not that, because take for me, for example, I went back to grad school later on and got my degree. It's not something I did as the first time I went to college. So it's reasonable to think that even later people may be in that learning phase or in that deep dive phase, that different gifts might apply. All right. So it's important to understand where they are in that spectrum, right? Do they just find weather cool? Do they find gadgets cool? And weather just happens to be one of the things that could play into that, right? So maybe, if you understand a little bit more about what is making them tick a little bit, you can find yourself in a better spot. But I think there are, what I would say are, three broad categories that are worth considering when you're looking at weather gifts. And the first, oddly enough, maybe it's not oddly enough, is books. And I don't mean buying a Kindle book or an ebook. Those can apply, but I'm a firm believer in paper books, right? And one of the reasons for weather books that I think it's important is, I got one as recently as an anniversary present, right? It's a paper anniversary. And it was a cloud handbook, and it's a cute little book. And I even remember seeing somebody recommending it on their site. And at first I was like, no, well, I've seen a lot of these things, but it's kind of a neat, it's like a diary thing where you can go in. And again, the thought was nice. Whether I go and track the clouds in there or not, I may. Some of the things I've jotted down in there because it's kind of a neat thing, but I'll do it a lot of times when I'm with the person who gave me the present, right? Because it makes that experience more enjoyable. But books in general about weather, some of the best ones include photographs, right? Not all of them. If you want to buy a textbook, you can, and some of those have pictures. Some the pictures aren't that great anyways. But I find that just like weather is a very tactile experience, I find people that appreciate weather usually like having physical books. Now, I have tons of e-weather books, right? And there's a reason for that, from teaching about weather to just following, staying on top of what I need to stay on top of. I have a lot of things that are in electronic format, and those are very convenient in their own regard. But you will find me, if I ever have a question that's probably faster to find an answer on the internet for, I have a stack of about 5 reference books, right? One's related to dynamics of the atmosphere. One is related to thermodynamics. One is related to statistics, oddly enough. But whenever I have questions about topics, I'll first go there and try to find the chapter where it is and kind of flip through the pages. Now, do I often go to the internet and, check or cross-reference that? Yes, I do. But I find the ability to absorb and kind of flipping through the pages very particularly useful for me, right? But I've never given a weather book that someone said, I don't like it. Quite often people immediately, if you've given a book in a while, the people just start flipping through it. And so I do recommend it for people that have an interest in weather. And again, it can cross spectrums. So if you really have a learner in your house, you can there are books that are related and teach meteorology, yet do it without calculus, which I find very interesting. And there's a book out there specifically for that. And I like it because it's kind of like learning other topics for the first time. When you're getting it, a lot of these topics and ideas can be shared without making the weather topic necessarily over complex, right? So you can convey, and if someone really wants to go and study that as a future career, they'll get to the calculus part. Don't worry, they will not have a chance to avoid that if they really want to study it. All right. So book's number one. Number two is some sort of weather station. And I say that very broadly. You heard me mention this weather device I got that, was a best man gift. It has a barometer on it. It has a thermometer on it. It can tell me humidity. So it does multiple things. But you also heard me mention a Galilean thermometer. I've given small gifts of, kind of indoor, outdoor thermometer, weather I'll call them weather stations. And that's what I'm saying. I'm using a very broad sense. So more like instrumentation. But I really do believe a weather station, because they themselves, you're kind of upping the ante a little bit. I've seen them as cheap as around $100, but they can go up more. I know that, I guess the Weather Flow one, which is really kind of the hot item right now, is a few $100s. The one I got as a gift was around $500, right? So they can go from, let's say 100 and let's say up to 1,000. I mean, they really can run the gamut. I don't think you need to be spending $1,000 on a weather station. I would say, a few hundred at a max. But what I like about this gift is there's different ways you can go. You can be very focused on the idea. There's do-it-yourself ones that someone builds, right? That it's almost an experiment. Or there's these ones that are very focused on the data. And so what I really like about it is it's really good for the tech-heavy people, right? So it gives an opportunity to really get engaged in what that device is sharing about the very micro environment in which the recipient has it, right? And it's a great opportunity to share the differences between temperature at a airport that's how many ever miles away for the closest station that is being recorded properly. Let's put it that way, because there's plenty of people with these personal weather stations that share the data. But I know, for example, every time I lived in Chile, mine was not installed in a way that I would ever regard the temperature data to be highly accurate, because I didn't have the environment, whether the home or the apartment building I was in where I was multiple floors up. I knew I wasn't getting exact, but I knew the context, right? And I was able to relate that. And I think that's the beauty of this stuff, is it helps teaching in some regard the weather by just those differences, right? But there's so many models out there now. There's so many, like I said, there's new things come out, new technologies, new abilities, new features that I think you really can't go wrong with those things. All right. The last thing I would recommend is an experience. Now, what does that mean, right? Very simply, an experience might be something like a storm chasing vacation, and that's where it can get to be really expensive, like I was saying. But you can also do an experience where maybe it's a photography class. Like me, if there's somebody that's into photography and they really like weather photography, there could be a class that helps them with that, okay? Or it can be from you. Some of the best experiences I've had with people is when they've recognized that there's going to be a weather day, let's say, that we make an attempt to go do something where I'm going to be able to see whatever it is that's going on. And those are some of my best days, right? Some of my best days. And so you can find those too. And a lot of times that's something that doesn't necessarily cost a lot of money, right? Because it can be very close to home if you've got a place that's a great spot to view weather. Or it can be a little short trip around a meal or something like that. And it can make the experience that much better. But by thinking about it, not so much as an individual item or one thing, right? You have the ability to kind of look at where that person is, where they think about weather, how they ingest weather into their lives, and what might be a good gift for them. And I'm sure you'll find one. And if you're ever stuck, feel free to send me a message. whatisabouttheweather@gmail.com. I'll be glad to help you out. But as you're picking a gift, whether it's weather related or not, just remember, thoughtful, but don't ever forget, there's much more to weather than the weather itself.